Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Korean Cultural Society of Boston's New Music Symposium. My name is Taeksoo Kim. I'm a composer and I teach music at San Diego State University. And it is my privilege to serve as the curator host of this symposium. Today, I am really excited to have not one, but two wonderful composers as our guest speakers. Dr. Chuchan Chusan Lee and Dr. Michael Sidney Timpson. They have been in South Korea for 11 years and they have been married for 22 years. That's really surprising to me and impressive to me. Dr. Chuchan Chusan Lee, her music has been described as eye-openingly, befittingly complex, but rather arresting to hear by Boston Globe, and exploring a variety of offbeat textures and unusual techniques by magazine Gramophone. She is 2015 Guggenheim Fellow and winner of numerous awards, including Brandenburg Symphony International Composition Competition, and Theodore Front Prize from International Alliance for Women in Music, and ISCM, which stands for International Society of Contemporary Musicians, and League of Composers Competition. She received commissions from Boston Symphony Orchestra, the From Music Foundation at Harvard University, Barlow Endowment, Taiwan National Culture and Arts Foundation, Taiwan National Symphony Orchestra, and National Taiwan Symphony Orchestra. They are two different organizations, and National Orchestra of Korea, Taiwan National Chinese Orchestra, among many others. Dr. Lee received her first degree at Soochow University in Taiwan and two master's degrees at Ohio University, which recently honored her with Alumni Achievement Award. And she got her terminal degree at University of Michigan. Dr. Michael Sidney Timpson is currently serving as an associate professor of music composition at Ewha Womans University in Seoul, Korea. He is 2009 Fulbright Scholar in Taipei, Taiwan, researching Taiwanese instruments. And he is also winner of numerous honors, including ASCAP Grant for Young Composers, a BMI Student Composers Award, and Brian M. Israel Prize. His music has been performed and recorded by the Kiev Philharmonic, the Czech Philharmonic, the Florida Orchestra, the Jacksonville Symphony, the Singapore Chinese Orchestra, and the National Orchestra of Korea as well. Dr. Timpson also earned his terminal degree at the University of Michigan and previous degrees from Eastman School of Music and University of Southern California. So without further ado, please join me to welcome these two wonderful composers. And please feel free to leave questions on the chat or on the comment if you watch on Facebook. We'll begin the presentations with Dr. Chuchan Chusan Lee.
Mute myself. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, I'm very honored and very happy to be share my music at the New Music Symposium here, and thank you so much for the invitations, Tatsu, and the associations in Boston. Today, my topic is will be about cross-cultural music encounters, and primarily will share the music that I have written since 2010, which was the year that I moved to Korea. Uh, and I'm actually counting a lot of blessings since then. There are quite a lot of wonderful, quite a few uh, blessings and nice activities that happened since 2010. And one of the activities that happened recently was the Boston Symphony Orchestra Commission that actually was world premiere, received world premiere last year on January 16 to 21. We've had 4 concerts in a row right before the pandemic. So I'm like, phew. In fact, I was actually one of the last concerts that BSO did before the pandemic situation kicked in. So I really are blessed about that my piece actually was able to be programmed and performed and premiere. So it was a very nice experience for sure. And besides that, yeah, there are a couple. I found it like the big event or like a breakthrough point for my composition career that also happened in between of 2010 up to now. Uh, in 2014, I was very fortunate to receive 2 commissions by the National Orchestra of Korea, which is the Gugak Orchestra. And the 2 projects that I did, is one is for Recompose, which I actually choose traditional Korean music, sumu, which I love it very much, and then use the material to recompose into a new piece among the other 3 foreign composers. And besides that, I also received another project from the National Orchestra of Korea to write a concerto grosso for Chinese Erhu, uh, 笛子 and Sanxian, accompanied by the Gugak Orchestra. So those 2 events I counted very quite significant, definitely in my life. And then I got I mean, during the time period up to now, I mean, before the pandemic hit, yeah, I was also fortunate to be able to travel around the world and then work with musicians around the world, like in Germany, in Israel, Switzerland, Poland, and of course, US, and in Asia, like of course, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, China. Indonesia, etc., Thailand, yeah. And I also very counting my blessings that I got to meet a lot of great musicians in Korea, fantastic musicians, in fact, and also many great composers. I mean, my God, it's amazing. There are just so many wonderful composers, all very skilled, who actually live in Korea. So it has been a very uh, fulfilling and fun ride for me, for sure. Yeah, so that and then I also got the various opportunities to work with different musicians and ensembles and orchestra, etc. So those are a couple of groups pictures that from different orchestra ensembles that I had a pleasure to work with in the past. Yeah, and I'm kind of making a list. So on this particular list, majority of pieces actually were written for Korean traditional music instruments. Sorry, and 2 out of this list actually were using the Korean music materials to compose for string quartet and choir. But yeah, primary majority of them actually are involved with Korean traditional instrument. And with my pleasure, I would like to share some of my pieces today with the audience here. And The first piece that I would like to share is the piece called Reciprocity. And this was a commission that I wrote for Hagen and piano, commissioned by Dr. Kim Hyung-hee Sansanim. And she's a very phenomenal Hagen master and now actually teach at Seoul National University. And then am very lucky in a way because before I composed this particular piece, I got to have several sections of a field studies with her directly. So I got to explore the traditional techniques as well as try to figure that out, working with her to uh, find out the extended techniques on Hegel, and then also explore the possibility of borrowing techniques from each other. I'm talking about like from piano to Hegel, Hegel to piano, as well as from the similar instruments such as like erhu, also samsai or trumpet, as well as like hemidulcimars, zithers, percussion, etc. And for this particular piece, my idea is try to build a new sonic environment. And within this environment, there are the battle and the marriage of East and the West. Yeah. And one more thing that I would like to talk about this piece is that, the title Hey He, Hey is kind of implied to Hegel, and he, it's kind of like fun games or like a theater. And it also, it's the abstract of the Hyung-hee's name is part of her name as well. Yeah, so it's kind of all linked together. And before I share this piece, I also would like to mention one very significant thing. I think, I mean, my music definitely is not easy music per se, and up to today in my composition career, I can count probably less than my fingers here of musicians who can memorize my music on stage. And yeah, Hyung-hee was one of them. It was very amazing. Yeah, so here on the screen, I've shared the beginning of the piece, and you will see some of the notations and techniques that they might not be usual for Hegel, but let's listen to it. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, in the middle of this piece, Hehi, there was sections that I purposely wrote in a way that I'm hoping if the audience not actually look at the screen at all, or not to look at the video, not to look at the score, just close your eyes and just listen to the music, and then try to guessing. It's like a guessing games. Would this actually sounds from piano, or would this sounds from Hagun? Yeah, so it's kind of a very fun games that I kind of designed in the middle of this piece. And following of the after these sections, there's Hagun Samjo section. And the Hagun Samjo section actually are accompanied by piano parts that involve a bit of a percussive sounding like this. So it's a little bit like imitate the changu and book, to accompany sanjo, the Hagun Sanjo. So yeah, let's listen to these sections. And hopefully you can have some fun to guessing if you can just close your eyes, especially the beginning part. Yeah, so I hope you can actually feel the sanjo music, and with the imitated changus, everything. And were you able to guessing during the percussive sections whether the sound is from the piano or Hagun during the performance without looking at the score? I mean, it's actually I mean, yeah, it's fun. Again, hey, it's a fun game. So I hoping that people can really enjoy that. And yeah, so one of the other project that I did during this time period is a piece called CJK Quartet. The meaning is actually mix Chinese, Japanese, and Korean because it's written for those traditional instruments from these three aspects. Uh, Locations and then and the piece actually is written for Japanese Shinohue no Guan and Korean PD, Chinese Da Di, and Shen is a bit similar to Shen Huang. And the program notes for this piece, in fact, it's very simple. It's the same meaning, bring wings, swings, grace, falling ranks to put it in 5 different languages. So we're talking about in English, Taiwanese, in Mandarin, Japanese, and Korean. So this is my program notes for this particular piece. And I'm just going to show you just a picture of the performance. And if you can take a look at it, here is our Piri player, Gamin. She was actually on the New Music Symposium not too long ago, I believe. Very phenomenal Piri and Shen Huang prayer. And if you take a look at the way that she played Piri, you might feel, that's not usual, right? Because Piri normally should be played vertically. But in this case, because I would like to actually create the wind sounds, so they have to bore the wind the air through the holes to create the wind sounds. And same thing for Sung here. It's also doing the sideways by blow the air into the hole to actually create a wind sound. Excuse me. And the Japanese Shonoi and no will and the Dadi, again, they are not actually blow the air directly from the mouth hole. It's actually blow the air through the finger hole to actually create different type of a sounding and tone. So in this particular piece, there's I actually did have instructions to tell people that how to line up with the numbers of a hole, so where to blow, where to put their finger, the fingerings, etc. And the score itself sometimes actually also show like a multiphonics, that where we know all these instruments normally can come up with one sound besides Sen, but like for Dadi or any Japanese flute to create the multiphonics, there are certain fingering can actually achieve that goal. So in this particular piece, actually had some of those techniques within it. Now, I'm going to just jump to the next project that I did, the Rind of Strings. This is a piece that I wrote for pipa and 18-string kayakun, and it was actually written for Ijong Sansenim, a very phenomenal kayakun master from Korea, and also to Hui Kwan-ling, a very phenomenal pipa player from Taiwan. And this actually was a commission piece and funded by the Taipei city government to finish this piece. And the idea of this piece actually was based on two main streets from the capital city of Taiwan and Korea. So the Kanan Boulevard actually is a very important street that is right in front of the presidential building in Taipei City, and that street actually carry a lot of historical aspect in Taiwan, as well as serve a very important political meaning, like there are protests, etc. Actually were all taking places on that boulevard. And the same type of thing actually happened for Sejongdairo. Sejongdairo, again, it's also carry a very great significant symbolic importance from the past and to the current. I mean, the historical concept and the arts cultures. Plus, nowadays, it also serves as a very important political protest locations, etc. So, both of these two main streets in both countries are all very unique and with a lot of heritage to be spoke about. Yeah, so this is the piece, and I actually have a video I'm just going to show right at the beginning of the piece. Okay. Yeah, so so this is uh, performance actually by Sang Lim and Hui Kwan, right after the commission was completed. It's a very fun piece to write, and I hope you still can actually hear the original, the traditional touches from each one of these instruments. Now, the next piece is actually also a commission piece that was commissioned by the Three Z's. And the Three Z plus this ensemble, it's composed by the three different Zlers from different countries. So it's written for Japanese koto, Chinese zen, Korean kagum, and changu. And in this particular piece, each one of the instruments retains in its originality, and at the same time, so by the end of a piece, I kind of uh, is, uh, created a sections that using the traditional vocal singing from Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. And the parts of singing, the text essentially is talking about a flower blossomed and falling, which actually try to imprint the nature of our lives from the birth until the death. Yeah. So and I would like to show part of the video performed by Three Z's, and yeah, Jocelyn actually, it's the Kayakun musicians, and this is the sections using the Kayakun Sanjo, yeah, with the percussion changu. Yeah, so as you can tell from this particular sections, there are the like the Sanjo Kayakun music that actually been presented here. Now I'm going to directly jump to the end of a piece with the traditional singing, and I hope you enjoy this. This is actually one of the sessions I'm personally really in love with. Yeah, so this is the end part of the the intersect and intertwined that involved the singing that with the Taiwanese, and Japanese, and Korean. And let's see. Is our time doing okay? I guess.
Yeah, I think we can slowly move on to
Mhm.
mm, the next presentation, but can we take some questions?
Sure, sure, of course.
Okay, Dr. Byung Kim has asked um, one question. So Korean, I mean, you are using instruments from multiple backgrounds and multiple traditions. And so sometimes I think there might be some balance issue because some instruments are naturally louder and some are softer, especially Korean traditional instruments are soft spoken sometimes. So how do you define the way to make it work?
That's an excellent questions, by the way. Um, in fact, okay, let me talk about my background a little bit. I actually have worked with Chinese traditional instruments since 1992, and then later on to gradually go on to work with the Korean traditional instruments and the Japanese traditional instruments, and I bet each one of the composer, they are having a different type of approach for sure when they deal with this type of instrumentations, what we call the mixed ensemble instrumentation. But every time when I deal with the traditional instruments or the traditional materials, one thing that I always put it in mind is that although that I'm a contemporary music composer, I always try to also share the traditional side of each one of the instruments, as well as the traditional music elements that I use. So in the way, I kind of finding the besides showing their own personality from each one of the instruments, at the same time also try to find the perfect marriage, yeah, to link it in between of the instruments. And I think more and more, yeah, like I believe and not too long ago, I had a talk at the Harvard University during their graduate seminar, and the students were addressed questions similar to this, and they come out with the conclusions, which I like it very much because they told me, hey. In fact, I think that's Chichun Chisun Lee's characteristics. That's your music styles in the way already because you kind of already uh, branded every materials into the type of a stylistic that is actually belong to you. That's how the interpretations, and I found that actually really, yeah, in touch with my thinking as well. So I mean, yeah, I think the most important part is to respect the tradition at this, also any type of the connections or new materials, etc. It's all come from the tradition and then go expand it out. Yeah, and then there's a foundations to kind of hold up everything, and then in between of the different instruments, although they are quite different, but it still would be able to find their common language to talk to each other, just like i- that I'm a Taiwanese American, but I live in Korea since 2010. So I'm also having tried very hard to finding my common language communication skills with local here as well, and then try to blend in because then that's and whatever come out as a combination in music, it's also become part of me. Yeah, so that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you also use some support of technology, like a microphone, to bring out some um, effects in that case to highlight some of those characteristics of individual instruments?
It actually depends on the instruments. Yeah, and also depends on the performance locations when you're talking about using microphone. I don't normally purposely using microphone per se. Now, for Heihi, that particular piece, I believe the performer. One of a concert she did, and the other concert she did not, because the weight of the whole design. One of the locations she was in, it didn't even need the microphone at all, because that's one very phenomenal thing about the concert hall design in Korea. They have a certain concert hall that really are purposely tailored for the Korean traditional instruments. So it amplified, just the stage itself already amplified the sound really well. So in that type of situation, it did not even need the microphone to bring out anything at all. And I think that's also another challenge to uh, for composers to think about it. You know, like for instance, when we're thinking about piano, it should be very gigantic, heavy, and big sound, loud noises. Versus to Hagen, yeah, it's in comparison shyer instrument. And so how to actually find the perfect balance in between of these two, that's kind of a test for the composer's skills and techniques. So I think yeah, and that also is the way why I kind of want to uh, uh, write it the way it is, to bring the perfect balance, that how I normally call it, the perfect marriage in between of two completely different instruments found in the two completely different words together. And personally, I mean, I don't know how the audience were thinking when they were listen to the second parts, the more like a effect portions. But every time when I listen to that part, I close my eyes. I'm like, this is very fun. Yeah, because it's kind of a the volume, the sound actually were pretty balanced in between of piano and Hegel in that concept. So it's it blend in from one to the other, just bridging in between each other. So yeah, I think it's the test for the composers, but I think all these tests can be done perfectly. Yeah, if one actually have a certain way of thinking or manage.
So understanding is the key. Uh, like if I may reiterate that statement, that's wonderful. And also beautiful music and beautiful performances. Thank you so much for sharing your music with us today. For the time being, we will move on to Michael Sidney Timpson's musical world, and we will get back to you after his presentation for more questions.
Sure,
Thank you so much.
you're very welcome.
And remind me what time you want me to present and tell about.
You mean the duration?
Yeah. No, about what time?
Let's say 35 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me share my screen here. Someone's still sharing. Okay. Okay. So the title of my presentation is, wait, why am I here? And this is my journey from west to east. Often we talk about east to west, but I went from west to east. In 2010, I received a great honor, the invitation to teach at Ewha Womans University in Seoul. However, I had been interested in non-Western music for many years. In fact, I had loved Korean music since I first learned about it in 1992 as an undergraduate at USC. And I did further studies in ethnomusicology during my graduate studies at Eastman in Michigan, and had been writing for non-Western instruments for many years, since 2000. In fact, I wrote my first piece for Chinese Sitsu ensemble in wrote many works since that time, and had some other important research that I did, such as being a Senior Fulbright Scholar, professor in Taiwan in 2009, working with the Taipei Chinese Orchestra and the National Chinese Orchestra there. Prior to moving to Asia, these aspects of East Asian music already had much influence on my approach to even Western music. For example, I'm very interested in heterophony. In fact, I'm very interested in heterophony as a way to generate music coming from a single source. Breath rhythm. Breath rhythm has always fascinated me because I come from a jazz background originally, and so this was kind of a polar opposite of a lot of my ways of thinking. Plus, originally as a composer, I was a bit of a maximalist, as a very complicated music, very inspired by Elliott Carter and things like that. So this was kind of a whole different world for me when I started learning about it. I very much admired the timbral flexibility of non-Western music. And also the variable intonation and how that is very different from Western music. And I think one of the important lessons I learned along the way is, unlike Western music, pitch is not the most important element. It is one of equal importance to other elements, such as intonation and gesture and other factors. How an instrument is designed is very telling on what musical aspects are important to a culture. I'm very fascinated with orchestration and how instruments are put together. So, for example, the piano that just popped on the screen here, we see how that keyboard is perfectly designed to hit the right note at the right point, to play chords. What did we spend all our time learning in music theory class? How to write Bach chorales, right? And if you really want to change the timbre of that instrument, you have to go inside of it. But that's an extended technique. That's like something beyond what normal piano playing is. As opposed to, and we have a slow approach here on purpose, as opposed to something like the kayagum. Of course, there's a modern kayagum, but I'm specifically here showing a Sanjo kayagum where your right hand, sure, it plays the pitch, but what your left hand does is very, very important on the other side of those bridges, manipulating intonation, timbre, gesture, etc. Of course, the right hand also contributes to those factors too. But this is like a very important way of understanding music, and for a composer, especially coming from the West and understanding how to use an instrument, it's instead of just trying to use it like a Western instrument. One of the other things that I, began to really realize over the years was the pentatonic scale or even melodic quotation are often the least authentic way to reference a culture's music, especially if you're using equal temperament or common practice harmony. In fact, you don't need either of those things. And Western notation at its basic level is a poor representation of how music in Asia and many other parts of the world plays because of what it focuses on. So I'll show you two examples, for example, of notation outside the West. The first one is from China. This is ancient Chuchan music, which is very much concerned on how to play the instrument and which ways you play each note on the string and the harmonics and everything. And then, of course, I have to show other than Hangul, one of the great things that came out of Sejong the Great is the music notation of Korea, Jeongeungbo. And very different from Western music on what details they focus on. Now let's get back to why I loved Korean music when I first heard it, back when I was a young undergraduate student in the US. To me, it had some wonderful contrasts and serendipitous parallels for me. First, let's talk about the contrasts. The ritual and court music had a unique stillness. This is often what I'm talking about why, when I first really came across breath rhythm and texture, heterophony. Yet the folk music in Korea is incredibly sophisticated and fun in its rhythm and timbres in very different ways than the ritual and court music. But then I also noticed some really interesting serendipitous parallels to my own background. I grew up as a jazz improviser, and Korean music, especially the folk music, while obviously having an independent history, had tangentially related elements to some of the things that I knew. Tone inflection, a little bit like how blues notes originally came about. Detuning the note is how the original blue notes came about. Focus on triplicate groove-like feelings, which is maybe parallel to swing, and many improvisational factors. I remember hearing so many parallels there. I knew they were completely different, but it just fascinated me. It in fact fascinated me almost more than any other kind of music I was learning in that class at the time. But I did not really know the music until I moved to Asia. So let's talk about how it changed me after I came here. Asia took me out of the American bubble. Often we don't like to admit it, but we live in a bubble in the US. It's very easy to live in a bubble. Moving away from the US, it very much internationalized me. Not just to the music of Asia, but much more to the music of Europe, which, especially at the time I went to school, we were kind of protected from that and away from our teachers. But most importantly, let me see American culture from the outside. In the US, we tend to have an exotic viewpoint of other cultures. This isn't necessarily a negative thing, and it's not like Orientalism or something, but it is more superficial. Like, wow, that's cool or neat. I want to copy that. Like, oh, it's so interesting that they eat with chopsticks. But these things are not cool or neat. These are normal things. Music represents a society's history. And by contrasting, it helps us understand its change into modernity. You know, the way to say hello in Korean, annyeonghaseyo, is wanting people to have peace. Yet modern Korean culture has this coexistence, what we call the Bali culture, the rushing culture. You know, one of the most technologically advanced places in the world. And also, it represents a very different perception of beauty and culture when we learn about music. For example, the way Pansori's singer's tone comes out is not something that necessarily a Westerner would have perceived as beautiful until they really get to know it and realize the effort and the energy put into it. And I also, even more, have learned how much effect colonialism and westernization can have on cultures, and how it can sometimes cause us to forget some of the past in our roots and misperceive them. So here I'm going to show you some examples on how my music changed. I only have a short period of time, so I'm not showing you any of my music from before, and some of that certainly was influenced by the music of Asia. But as I said, my music before I came here was kind of like maximalism mixed with jazz with some Asian influence, very eclectic. sorts of music. So one of the things that was very interesting about me by coming from a jazz background is I really never liked using any sort of indeterminacy or aleatoric music when I was younger, because I wanted to control every element. And, you know, I came from an improvisational background, and that was something I was getting away from. But I realized that, you know, Western notation can often trap music into a certain state. I remember often hearing composers writing for non-Western instruments, and the music sounded too tight and too constricted. It did not have the free-flowing quality that it should have. And it taught me a lot about music. And so this first example I'm going to show you is actually for Western instruments, but is an example of where I decided I had to invent my own notation. In fact, every movement of this piece has a different notation that I used. Now, this first movement maybe remind you of Lutoslawski or something. That one's probably more of a Western type of notation, all right, maybe out of Cage. And, you know, in some of the movements, there's more words describing what the performers have to do than there are notes. But the movement I wanted to talk a little bit about is this movement here, which I have some descriptions. But the music is about elements that need to happen and need to vary at certain points. But it isn't about like them having to fit exactly like this or like this. It's about the free flow of the music. And of course, it's not really chance music, because there are definite things that have to happen along the way in the music, and certain things at certain moments that will be definitely happen every time this piece is performed. In fact, I don't think one should actually look at the score while listening to this piece. It kind of would be nonsensical to actually look at the score. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of this piece, of that last movement that I showed you there. So there are obviously many other things I can talk about with that piece, and that brings me into the next issue that I've really changed once I've come here, is that I've learned that the smallest gesture or timbre change or intonation change can actually make the biggest difference. And also, I've become a much more patient composer, I think, than I was. I was always wanting to be rushed and excited in all my pieces when I lived in the US. This piece here is another piece, yes, that I invented some of my notation that needed to be used for it. This is a duet for various Japanese fue, which are types of flutes, and Korean reeds. Of course, the type of instruments I use in the piece are shinoboe, ryoteki, and nokon of the Japanese flutes, and teipyeonso, pieri, and senghwang of the Korean reeds for this duo. Of course, I have a little explanation here showing people the instruments. And this was actually written for uh, two musicians that I think you saw in the previous lecture, but most notably Gamin, who is part of this series here. And I want to go first directly to show an example of a piece where I think gesture can mean a lot, especially very patient last gesture in bringing out music. So this is from my piece called, you notice I have these sometimes funny titles, 236. This should start right at that movement. Yes. Now, as I say, I'm often attracted to the contrasts of music, so I just wanted to give a small sampling of the first movement here, which uses Hyunso. So I'm actually going to come to the next piece I'd like to talk about. So sometimes I have to invent notation to represent what I want. Sometimes I use conventional notation, Western notation. The smallest gesture or timbre change can make the biggest difference. But I've also learned that simplicity is always the best genesis for any complexity. So pieces can be very complex, but they can be based on something very simple is often the best approach. This work is the next one I'm going to play for you is a very special work to me because, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why I fell in love with Korean music was this serendipitous sort of parallel it had with my jazz background and some of the gestures and nuances. And in fact, one music that really struck me was the Shinawi music, because of it being a very improvisational form and sometimes sounding almost representing of what I thought of late Coltrane or Ornette Coleman harmonics. So when I was asked to write a piece for the Korean National Traditional Orchestra, or the Korean Traditional Orchestra, they asked me, what kind of thing do you think you could do that you could bring your American side to it? I said, well, I'm a saxophonist, and I think soprano saxophone especially could be used in some very, very authentic ways and a nice mixture with Korean instruments. And Shinawi is used more in a broader sense, I would say. It's in general, I know a lot of these different genres well, but I'm not trying to recreate the exact music. I'm trying to have the heart of the music inspire me to find voices inside myself I didn't know I had. Now, what's interesting about the story of this piece is that the original piece I was going to write was going to be a bit different than this piece. But while I was writing it, the Seoul ferry disaster happened. And I basically had to stop composing. And I said, I can't write this piece. And I wrote a very different piece. So this work actually tells the story of this occurrence. I would not say at all that this was inspired by it. Obviously, it's something that I felt like I had to do. And it actually has 4 movements to the piece. The score, of course, is too difficult to read because it's for an orchestra, so it's very small, but it has 4 movements to it. The first movement represents the high school children getting on a ferry, being very excited for their school trip going to Jeju. But yet, there's something about the ship they don't realize that's not very steady. And I'm often inspired how asymmetrical meter is a natural part of Korean folk music. And so that makes its appearance. And so and some of the aspects of the soprano saxophone and the similarity of sound to Taipyeonso are brought out. So that is the first movement of the piece, and I'll tell you about other movements as I play them. I have to go to the first movement first. Sorry. I guess it was a sound check there. So I just got a message that I know I'm running a little bit long. So I thought I'd just play a few little tiny excerpts from some of the other movements. The second movement is about the actual moment where the ship falls over. The moments right before that, and it begins to sink. Let's see. I keep showing the. And one small excerpt from the third movement when the actual sinking of the ship happens. Let's see if I can get the right moment right here. Back. Hold on. The end of that movement. And then the next movement is the moment where the ship begins to sink and the crisis starts. Apologize. I guess I have to cut it off at this moment because I'm probably going over on time. But all this is on YouTube, of course, if you want to see the rest of the piece. For me, I've always enjoyed the quote that as Stravinsky, or was it Picasso or T.S. Eliot, once said, mediocre artists copy, great artists steal, meaning that to really, really embrace something, you need to make it your own. So if you just copy something, you're not doing it justice. You have to bring new life to it. So thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Well, thank you to both of you. That was fabulous presentation, and I really like your music. In fact, the Shinawi, the Heartbeat, was the first piece I heard of Michael Timpson when it was premiered in South Korea, and that's when I got to know and meet both Chihchun and Michael, because they both had their pieces premiered at that point. So yeah, it's good to get reconnected here with you. And let me just invite both of you for just a couple of questions that we may have. So I would love to invite some of us, if you have any questions, to ask Dr. Timpson and Dr. Lee. And I need to apologize that I had to cut the music. I really I remember the riff and still like da, 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 da. So like you know, I really want the audience to check it out at some point.
Yeah, I had to cut off a part there that was going to come next, but that's okay. The one thing I forgot to mention, by the way, that was Lee Jung-shik, the famous jazz saxophonist, who's ironically known as the Kenny G of Korea, but his true love is John Coltrane. So it's like, and I was giving him some directed improvisations. Obviously, he was doing improvisations, but there were certain ways I wanted him. Sometimes it was aleatoric, sometimes it was jazz notation, but with a lot of descriptions on how I wanted him to play. Someone said the last Gugok orchestra has cello section. Is there a reason to have cello? Was there any other instrument? So it's common in both the modern Korean Gugok orchestras and also in the Chinese orchestras to include cellos and basses, because there's not really a low instrument that can fill that role. So there's actually cello seats in the orchestra. I have friends who, they're a cellist or a bassist in like the Singapore Chinese Orchestra. That's their gig. There has been some attempts to replicate spike fiddles, or the sound, at least giving them a snakehead drum for the instrument, but that's kind of an attempt to kind of get a lower range of instruments. Now they do have the ajang in the Korean orchestra, which does come close to the range. It's more like a viola range, the lower instrument, but that is a common tradition. You didn't see all the parts. I do have actually the cellists play Colengio Trato, like they were playing an ajang. They're playing with the wood at some points, but that wasn't, I don't think, in the part I showed. But yeah, that's the main reason why you find cello and bass sections in these orchestras. It's very common, actually, to fill out the lower end. And yes, there was electric piano in mine too. They often have a keyboard part, and they have Western percussion too, although I only used, I think, some mallet percussion of the Western instruments. All the other ones were Korean percussion instruments on purpose.
That's great. So there's another question. I think it can be to both of you. What do you expect your music have impact on both Korean or Asian traditional music and Western music? Like in your case, also like a jazz, Michael, but classical as well, to both of you. What's your role in the history?
All I can say is I just try to write honest music. I was just trying to explain that while I'm not trying to necessarily sound exactly like the music of Korea or the music of China or Japan or wherever place I have referenced in my music, the heart and soul of those traditions had a deep impact on me and the way I approach music. And so it's my way of helping understanding in the world. Other composers might do it another way, but I don't claim to be someone from the period of time of Sejong, so I'm not going to try to be that. But I'm going to see how there are tangents and how there are things that I can learn about music that I hadn't thought to approach before. And I often think that Western music had done a lot of damage to traditional cultures' music. So not that I want to imitate that music, but I think we can learn a lot from some of these traditions that were sometimes almost wiped out or lost to the rest of the world, or even to in our own cultures. Sometimes we don't know our own music in the way it originally sounded. We know it like on piano, equal tempered, and without the bending or the gestures, etc.
What about you, Chihchun? Yeah, what do you think?
You're on
Please
mute, by the
unmute
way.
yourself.
You're on mute. That's why
I know.
I wasn't meaning to talk over.
No, not at all. No. Yeah. No, I think it's excellent questions. And truth to be told, for me, I think there are so many great composers. So nowadays and in the past as well. So it's really not my place to say that what I can do, what I do actually can make any impacts in the historical passage at all. But nevertheless, I kind of agree with Michael as well. It's just I'm trying to do the type of music that represented who I am, and although I have a lot of opportunity to deal with the fact that my have a reference to utilize some traditional materials or using the traditional instruments, etc. But I always try to find it a way to have a great the best merge that I can come up with, as well as to express who I am as a composer, as me, like the music of Chisun Chusan Lee. So ultimately, what I'm seeking, it's actually the music that people can listen to it, and they can just without looking at the program or anything, they can pinpoint, I know that's actually Chichun Lee's music, and that's kind of what I'm aiming for. But and if somehow, after I passed away for 100 years, like Bach, I can somehow be, discover, I will be so happy in my coffin. Yeah, but yeah, we basically do what we can until the day we die. I mean, that's the kind of a job for composer. We live and learn, we work until the day we pass away, just like Eddie Carter's, any one of the great composers who live no matter short or long time in their life. That's what our goals are.
Okay, wow. Both of you have just a very simple answer, but it's actually very deep and complex, and I need to ponder on your personal opinions. That's, yeah, beautiful. So I will ask the official last question for us for now. So the season title for us is Pioneers, and then we are actually celebrating the first Korean composers who landed in the States. And so one of the reasons I invited you is kind of the reverse side, so we can see the other side. So can you share a little bit of your experiences, who established yourselves in South Korea, and then if you have any advice, who would love to do the similar thing, who just come to Korea and become a composer as a non-Korean person, would you have any advice to them?
I think there's a lot underneath the culture that people should take the time to understand, because as I said, it's the Bali Bali culture now, but the tradition is still there. Even when people may not, study even their own tradition, it's part of their soul. It's a part of their character. It is there. And so one should be patient to kind of realize that it's really not the same place that you came from, and that people's approaches are different, and also that Korea's had to struggle through a lot of its history, that a lot of people try to wipe out its culture through so much time and its history, and And what's great now at this point, and it wasn't always true, is that now Korea really celebrates the arts and they really celebrate their traditions. For a long time, the colonialism taught them, oh, Western music is better, but it's so wonderful now that they celebrate their own traditions. I mean, they've been doing that for quite some time, but the history of missionaries and colonialism did some damage, and I'm so happy that now that you can learn a lot about the cultures here, but you have to be patient and take the time to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree with Michael's statements as well. Now, as a foreigner, live in Korea, um, I think the situation just depends on persons for sure. Now, as the Westerner, white Westerner, I think it's because it is so different than the Asian person. So, I did feel that the people's receptions of the foreigners for people who don't looks the same as they are, especially for the white, they have a bit more respect right at the beginning. Yeah, when yeah the people are here, but for me, I mean, it is a bit different because I'm female and I'm also Asian looking. Yeah, so right at the beginning was a bit more challenge for me, and this is like the suggestions that I have for people who looks like me to would like to be in Korea. I mean, they are still. I think no matter which type of locations, will have pro and cons for sure. And truth to be told, I have to say, since 2010, when I landed in South Korea, I can only count my blessings. No matter what type of cons comes, I think the pro still outbids the cons for sure. And the way that how the contemporary music is still being treasured and being respected in Korea, that is actually prosperous, than any other country that I've been, truth to be told. Yeah, so I mean, I'm very, grateful for the environment that I've been in, and I'm hoping to be able to stay here longer if it's possible, of course. Yeah, and it just, yeah, just would like to say that no matter how you looks like, or even just you are the composers looks like me as a female, looks like Asian. The most important thing is to be truthful to ourselves as a composer, and then try our hardest to actually work into the society. Yeah, I mean, it's not the easy path per se for me, and I think it might be easier for the newcomers nowadays, since we already, being here as the first group of foreigners. Yeah, and in fact, there are many more opportunities actually to open up for the local residents, foreigners, the foreign composers nowadays. And I mean, one person that we have to thanks a lot, a great deal, is Professor Imam Bangsangseni. I mean, he definitely were one of the elder composers in Korea, really stood up for us as a foreigner who actually has lived in Korea, paid Korean taxes, and for many years, and finally he convinced people here to open up opportunities for us, and that was the reason why both Michael and I can still thrive, in these locations. It's, more or less because his great help, and also, of course, there are many other fantastic Korean friends. They are very kind to us. Like, I have to say, for me, when I landed in Korea, I was a bit surprised because because I'm female and also Asian. So people, and non-Korean Asian, in fact, I should mention that non-Korean Asian. So it was a bit harder for me to be accepted into the society. So it was, I mean, as a composer for almost all my life, it was the first time that I feel that, oh, wow, I'm so invisible. Every concert that I went to, is like, people look at me like I'm part of a wallpaper. It's like, that's very interesting. It's like, I never encountered this. So for me, it's actually also very new experience as well. Yeah, but nevertheless, at that time, the Korean Women Society, Korean Society for Women Composers, they were the very first one opened up their door to accept me as a woman composer who is non-Korean, right? In 2010, 2011. Yeah, so I was like very grateful. I said, any type of difficult time, it still will come to some sweetness, from someone. So, and my parents always say that, when God's close one door, it will leave a window, a door, or the door for me to climb into, I guess. Yeah, so it would not always a closed door situation for anybody. It just, we just have to work hard and then find our way and then try our hardest to be part of a society.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Yeah, I can imagine. I can't even imagine actually how it was like. And, as much as I owe all my predecessors who paved the way for Korean composers in the States, I'm sure a lot of foreign composers who are settling now in South Korea would appreciate what you have gone through and all the wonderful things you did. Yeah, and I thank you so much for again inspiring talk. Unfortunately, we are going to wrap up today's presentation, but next week we will celebrate really the very first two Korean composers in the States, Earl Kim and Donald Sir. They are not alive anymore, but we will have wonderful panelists, if I may just enumerate the names: John Harbison, Paul Salerni, David Hose, Kyung Kang, and um, Jocelyn Clark, who is right here with us, who appeared in one of the videos playing and singing. And lastly, Scott Yu. So we expect to have a wonderful final meeting for ourselves. But until then, as I would say, stay safe and stay musical. And I will see you next week.